Welcome back to Talking Tricks, everyone. Today is a great episode because we have Nick here. Hey, how you doing?
Hello.
Cool. And of course, as always, we have Jason and Bryce. No one really cares about them. But today, sorry, that was mean.
Wow, I really need my Jason heads to PM me, especially after they didn't from the
Uh,
last dissect. Yeah.
yeah, Nick, we have Jason head, Frank heads, and Bryce heads now.
Oh,
Although
wow.
officially we only have Frank heads. Just saying.
Mm,
Um,
It's
but
not true.
anyway, topic of our discussion today is going to be about some old school tricking terminology, some of the stuff we're bringing up in terms of trick theory, and kind of critiques of both, and seeing where the fault is in all of them, and just to get a gauge of how tricking language has evolved. So yeah, before we get into that, I do want to say, Nick, you should introduce yourself. I'm sure most people are initiated, but yeah, just give us a little down and dirty of who you are, why you're important to the tricking community.
sure. Thank you. Yeah, no, my name's Nick Vail. I started tricking 18 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
this January. I
You
started in
started tricking?
Colorado. Say what?
You started tricking?
I started tricking like the whole sport. I started all
Right.
of it.
Yeah,
No.
18 years ago. No, that sounds
I
about right.
began doing tricking separate from martial arts 18 years
Mm-hmm.
ago.
Mm-hmm.
If we're really being like technical, I was doing tricks in the 90s, but I was a young kid doing sport karate, and I don't count that.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was only doing tricks for trick reasons, it was about 18 years ago.
Mm. He's
Um,
calling out Danny Graham. I'm just kidding. No.
so
Anyway.
I started in Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm still here. And so when I started, it was Dan Perez, myself, Chance, Josh Durbin, only a few people, Ty, Eric Benjamin, who started Trick Session.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we gradually worked on the community here.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I spent a lot of time in tricking for, probably up to like year 10 for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I I think I contributed as much as I could with the skill set I had, and I left tricking
Mm-hmm.
in an athletic way.
Mm-hmm.
I went to school because tricking taught me how to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I have debilitating ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
and so I failed out of high school. Like I dropped out. And
Wow.
so I
I didn't
went
know that
back to school.
actually. That's
Yeah, I
interesting.
dropped out. I had like a 10th grade education when I was in tricking, and so tricking taught me something.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do tricks until and then move on, right? Like we
Mm-hmm.
do tricks till we can't do them wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that was apparently a good skill to bring to academia, and I needed that for learning. And so
Mm-hmm.
I did associate's programs in math and physics, and that brought me to astrophysics. I did an undergrad in astrophysics. I did 4 years of research for NASA,
Mm-hmm.
and then afterwards said, "Hey, I'm still interested in tricking,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm at like year 16 at this point."
Mm-hmm.
And I say, "Hey, I want to still work on problems in tricking."
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent a lot of time talking to people like you,
Mm-hmm.
people that are working on tricking and finding ways for me to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
And that's landed me to where I am now. And I work on the business environment.
Mm-hmm.
I work on the community, and I work with the individuals. And so I have a personal financial practice where I try to make solid the financial foundations of tricking.
Mm-hmm.
The thinking is that this education, access, capital, collateral will all percolate up into the business environment, give us the ability to turn the community into an industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so just a quick why as to why I'm doing it. I seek 500 trickers to help add something like $200,000 of personal net worth, which is an aggregate $100 million. And that is a war chest we can build an industry out of.
Yeah.
And so this is what I currently focus on,
Mm-hmm.
because I went through 2 knee surgeries.
Mm-hmm.
The first one nearly killed me.
Mm-hmm.
I had a subluxation of my right knee, and that put me in the emergency room, and they were about to operate to try and repair a torn femoral artery, but it
Oof.
wasn't torn.
Okay.
So for a moment there, we were worried about me, the person, not me, the tricker.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went through a few evaluations that landed me on a surgery that was not quite cleared. Still in the, I mean, you would know better than I would, Frank, but it was,
Mm-hmm.
we were still in the process of clearing this, and I had to consent to the surgery.
Right.
But I came back. I was better than I was before, impressively, because I tore my PCL, FCL, popliteal tendon, and ligament. I fractured my tibial plateau,
Mm-hmm.
biceps femoris avulsion fracture and a spiral tear of the medial meniscus. So essentially, and partial ACL, MCL tear.
Yeah.
So it turned my right knee into raw meat, and then I came back, and I was tricking harder than I ever did before after that, because I did my PT, I listened to my doctors, science is good.
Do your PT.
And then
for sure.
Yeah, do your PT. Wait, and just like a quick plug for doing PT and training, like wait an extra week to come back. You can always wait an extra week. You can't if you come back to a week too early, it's so much worse than if you just wait another week, right?
It's so
always
funny
take that
say
approach.
that. When I was an athletic trainer, that was literally my rule. I was like, okay, whatever the doctor recommended, just wait an extra week and like gradually
One extra week.
Yeah, like
And I didn't have the luxury, right? Like when I had the injury, the guy was like, "We're hoping you walk again." Actually, sorry, we're hoping we don't amputate your leg. And I was like, okay.
That's crazy.
I will do what you say, right? Because I just want to walk again. And then walking, and then running, and then squatting, and I eventually did a backflip in his office, and that was pretty cool.
That's so sick.
Got back to tricking. I had another knee surgery. It was less bad, but anyways, yeah. So what I've spent most of my life, over half of my life, working on tricking, whether it was as an athlete in the community here in Colorado. Charlie Grenhart and I built the Tricking Tribe.
Yeah.
And that is what our why at that time, our Simon Sinek why, was let's create the conditions for tricking to thrive. Yeah. Needless to say, I think it did, right?
Yeah.
Tricking Tribe did its job. Charlie's done a great job with Kerwood now, fostering that growth over time. We had people like Ethan have moved here. A lot of people moved here. We produce trickers like Levi. And so I think we did a good job. I like can hang my hat on what we did in Colorado. Yeah. And now we can be focusing on the national community and the global community at large. And so I do work with like town halls and talking to a lot of the communities now, mostly behind the scenes, because that's where I think I do my best work. Yeah. So that's what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I would say pretty much every tricker would agree undeniably that, at least in the United States, that Colorado is the mecca of tricking, and that is definitely no small part due to you. So thank you for that. Thank you for all your contributions. That's what we seek to do. We want to contribute to the community post tricking. I mean, not saying that you're post tricking. We're all washed up. Let's be real.
I mean, but I tricked on Thursday.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and also your story about your knees, insane. If I'm not mistaken, you did triple cork after your surgery.
I did.
Right?
So yeah, I did. I came back after the surgery. I did triple cork from master scoot, gainer switch. Damn close on dub, gainer, triple. So close. I did. I was doing dub variations, which I hadn't done prior to the injury. So I definitely was better afterwards. I was landing like hyper 12s, mainstream hyper 12s on the knee that got torn up.
Thank you for not using TKT. I appreciate that.
I mean, I would prefer to say backside, like hyper 9, but I understand where I am, right? We're about to critique the pre-modern system, so I might as well start and throw y'all a bone.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I think Bryce and Jason might start to agree with you.
He's already heard that we totally agree with the rotation reset part of TKT. But,
okay.
Yeah, but our numbers.
We told you about that though under much different circumstances. So
it's true. Yeah, that was at Central Florida gathering, right? Yeah, good gathering, by the way. I hope we all go to Central Florida gathering next year.
Oh yeah, I will be.
I too will be there.
I had an amazing time. So yeah, I mean, I guess let's get into a little bit of the trick theory side of things. So I want to hear a little bit about maybe some of your early contributions into trick theory, because I know you're a little bit of an active part. I know it's also been a few years, so it's okay if you don't remember everything, but I'd just like to hear the point of view of a tricker learning trick theory at that time,
Yeah, so when I started tricking, a lot of trickers were sport karate athletes, and we were still trying to bridge the gap between sport karate terminology and then tricking specific terminology. TT was really helping with this. Juji was doing his part in describing things in the best way that we had. So shout out to John for that. And so what I learned was I remember when it was very obvious to us that there was sport karate terminology and then there was tricking terminology. And I remember this division. One of the people that really helped me see this was Dan Perez. And so he was one of the first people I saw that like was irked by this problem, that there needed to be a better system. What they were doing was different from what we were doing. Even if we still respected what they were doing, it was different. And it wasn't necessarily descriptive of the direction we were going.
Sorry, I do want to interject really quick. I'm curious as to what even the sport karate terminology looked like, because I honestly have no clue.
So
what's an example?
We had names like kamikaze swipe, which is a touchdown race, as far as I remember.
That's so cursed. I love that.
So it was more like tricks just kind of had any sort of name. There was no like sort of fashion or logical consistency.
Zero.
We're very vocally anti that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that, so what I remember from that was a lot of the innovators, like your Anthony Atkins, your loop kicks guys like Isaiah Flores and these guys, they would do a trick and then they would call it a name, and then that would get passed around sport karate tournaments. And everybody kind of had different names for the same tricks. And, this is how we got names like jackknife, box cutter, things like this. Right. And so, tricking adopted some of those terms, and then after adopting them, we tried to find consistency. Inherently flawed approach, right? And what I understand we're trying to do now is we're trying to like take something like a source assumption, like a first principle, and then build out from that. And this is where we're at currently, and we were the antithesis of that. Like flip that all the way around to it's almost like going outside and naming a tree and naming a rock, and then like trying to come up with some sort of consistent naming convention. And like that's what we were dealing with. So
I think current day tricking is still plagued by that problem for sure.
I wouldn't say that. We definitely still work within the context and framework of like mainstream understanding and like references to tricks and stuff. Like we still rely on that heavy, and we're very hesitant to try to change terminology, especially terminology that works and we can make consistent, after the fact. But I would say even still to this day, our framework is largely based on trying to make sense of what currently exists now, and maybe making a few tweaks here or there to like, to try to improve. But
to your point, right? To your point, there's we have stuff that like functionally works. It's taught a number of generations of trickers, yet we know it's inconsistent. Right. And so, and like, how do we reconcile this? And this is kind of like, this is an age-old problem. This is the same problem we were dealing with. It's just way more advanced now, right? We have more tricks. We understand there's more out there. We understand there's even gaps currently. We haven't seen all the tricks yet. Despite the range of what we see, there are still some, like before this, we were talking about Malik and the Muggle Slayer. This is a gap in tricking, and like the naming conventions kind of created it. And it's almost like Mendeleev with the periodic table.
Yeah, well,
he was like, I don't know this thing, actually, but it's going to have a property, and go out and measure it, and it was germanium, right? Like, and that's what happened. And so, go ahead.
It's great that you bring that up, because in just the same way that ability to predict the existence of new elements was a validation of Mendeleev's periodic table. We kind of use the existence and prediction of new tricks as a validating technique for new languages now.
That is what we're seeking to do. We're seeking to find these emergent properties or things that have been overlooked because of our language. Exactly what you were saying. Like the reason Muggle Slayer never existed is because we didn't really have a formal way to define these. I'm going to call them perpendicular tricks. There was no formal logical way to talk about them. It's just like, here's a nickname. Like this is this trick. So we can't extrapolate from that what's going on. So that's what we're seeking to do, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, we've never, so perfect segue. So when we were, back in the day, I'd say like 2006, 2007, 2008, the first attempt at this was Dan Perez's TKT.
Yeah.
I like, this is the first time I saw this, where he was like, okay, let's take a step back, right? And let's try and reduce this to the smallest fundamental unit. And at the time, that was our takeoff position. And so it was like the stances we were taking off in. And so we started naming those. Well, he started naming those. Frontside, backside is where we started on vert kicking. and then we had 4 different positions for taking off for flipping.
Mm.
We hadn't quite done the jump, like we hadn't bridged the gap between changing axes mid trick.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like a tack, or like the shuriken nowadays is a combination of multiple axes.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time it was like there are vert kicks, and then there are horizontal like flat spin tricks, and then there are invert tricks.
Yes.
And we can have different takeoff stances, and this was like mind blowing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fights on TT over this. Epic proportions, right? I mean,
I wish I was there for that.
Literally wanted to fight in person over the disagreements, right? The epic proportions of these fights. And so what I found that we had actually tied our identity to these tricks, and this was like something my more mature self realized looking back on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Dan's approach was let's have at least this is my understanding of his approach. I'm not going to speak for him now, because he's definitely refined this method and stands behind it. So at the time, what we were trying to do was we're going to say, we're just going to isolate vertical kicking, and we're going to try and understand it in the best way we can.
Okay.
And we're going to understand our takeoff stances. We're going to understand like how the hypering works. And my understanding of TKT at the time was this applies to vert kicking only. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's not the case anymore. I haven't kept up with it, but at the time, this is how we viewed it and how I viewed it.
If you're talking about
to buttress Nick's point, TKT literally means true kick terminology.
Mm-hmm.
It's not true trick terminology. It's not true.
True kick.
I believe it's still like even Dan Prez's latest version of it. It still only refers to kicks, as far as I know.
And that tracks, right?
Yeah.
Like thinking about who Dan is and what his objective was.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, this was like predictive. In fact, I felt like there were times when I would go into the gym and I would land like kicks that I hadn't seen anybody else do, because he would just describe them. And I'm like, well, there's a gap here. We should be able to do this thing. And so you would be like taking off in the backside, doing a 360 and a hyper hook kick. Landing on 2 feet, landing on 1 foot, landing on a non-kicking leg, and then transitioning. This was really novel. And so like Kyle McLean, myself, Dan Pitlock was doing a lot of this stuff at the time when we were like angsty teenagers and doing the CAX thing. So
we have a treat for you, Nick. If that's what you got at TKT, you're gonna get like double of that from BTT, in my opinion. But
I mean,
go on.
Hey, I'm here for it. So when we were doing, so at the time, like if you started in backside, you did a 360 in the air and hook kicked on the same position you took off of, that was backside 720. And the big fight here was like, this is a 360 with a hook kick, right? And so we called it a 360 hook. And the copious amount of fights we got into on TT was like incredible. I think I even got banned over it at one point, like badge of honor, right? To get banned from TT or moonfaced or something.
Wait, I have a quick question. What did the arguments look like for the side that argued for like keeping the 720? Like, was it for tradition's sake? Was it for, okay.
It was like this is a backside 720. Okay. And I'm like, okay, so then if I do a 180, it's a backside 540. And then if I don't twist at all, it's a backside 360. This is how the fights went. And as I was like, help me, I'm just going to reduce this down to 0. So then if I do, would I need to rotate the other way to do a backside 180? Like, this is what got me banned, was like this line of reasoning.
And that traditional argument has existed and continued to work until now. And really the only reason
works?
Like, no, not, well, in the minds of most trickers,
right?
Okay. Mainstream is mainstream for a reason. But Jason and I were able to convince ourselves out of it just by the introduction of a bunch of new different types of vert kicks from a bunch of new different types of takeoff positions.
Sure.
Because now once you've done that, you have to ask the question, okay, what rotation do I arbitrarily add to the beginning of all of these different things?
That was the thing, is we're arbitrarily adding a 360 just because when we started, a cheat 720 was...
No, Frank, you can't talk. I have next.
Okay. Because when this started, and I think I know the origin of this, right? Like I feel like I have this. So when we started doing like a pop 7, it was I spot twice, which means I do 2 rotations and a hook kick. And Dan was like, well, you're only doing 540 in the air. You're taking off in front side, 360, step over hook in the air is a 540. So you're doing 540 in air rotation. So we call it a pop 540. But a backside is like the backside assigns an extra 180. So, you know, like that's how this kind of happened, right? And so a cheat 720 was like, I do a tornado kick takeoff and then I spot twice and I hook kick. So I'm cheating my 720. This is like, and again, we didn't know that like cheat was a vanish, right? This is something that Dan came up with. Was like,
oh, that was cursed. That was cursed, Nick. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So at the time, and we're talking about back in the day, right?
No, yeah, of course.
Let me do my relic talking. So the thinking was, it wasn't when we did like a cheat 7, it wasn't, the cheat was when we first realized that like the transition was different than the rotation and the kick. This was like big brain thinking at the time. And so later Dan really made waves by saying all cheat kicks are vanishes, and vanishes can be done in a lot of different ways. And this was like, again, monumental, lots of fighting, lots of arguing. And so, but really the meat of this, right? The good thing out of this, in my opinion, was beginning to separate the transition from the rotation from the kick. And that was like paradigm changing.
I could agree with that last point. Absolutely.
Paradigm changing.
He had a different assignment of how to break these things up in saying like cheat was anything that was done from a vanish. So he would have a much broader definition of cheat than we don't use cheat in our modern version, but like I can see his
not necessarily. We don't use cheat as a transition in our modern version. I still recognize cheat as a particular trick setup. It's actually typically like a combo.
I don't.
Like a combo
because
ending.
It could be referring to 3 different things.
They're about to fight.
I know.
So to stop the fight, let's bring it back to the early 2000s and the 2010s. And the way we understood cheat was a cheat is a vanish on a singular trick. A vanish was 2 tricks. B-twist,
I think that's how
vanish,
Jason.
kick.
I think that's how Jason understands it.
And this is how we understood it at the time. I don't know what it is now, but like this is how we understood it at the time.
I think most people would agree with that. I'm almost certain. Yeah.
And so this was like early 2010s was like, this is kind of the understanding of how you put these two together. So like if I did, and the canonical was like what we call Dragon's Rage, which was B-twist to cheat 9.
Don't ever fucking say that again.
Yep.
Yeah. And then Super Dragon's Rage was B-twist cheat 12, right?
Oh my god, trickers are such nerds. Holy shit.
Yeah. No, we can blame Taimatsu for that. And God, I love his soul for being like, this is a Dragon's Rage. And I was like,
no, it's actually, I joke
careful, because that'll catch on.
I joke around because dude, that's how I feel about Muggle Slayer. We just jokingly threw out Muggle Slayer, like, here's a stand-in name. And then when Malik landed it, he's like, yeah, it's called Muggle Slayer. And we're like, God
damn it, you have so much power. Sorry, I just cursed. You have so much power, and you just said that.
I know. We were actually genuinely disappointed. Like, we didn't want it to be named that, really. Like, we were hoping someone would come up with a better name, for sure.
Listen, I put my trust in Malik, right? Like, what Malik says goes. And so,
that's true.
If it's a Muggle Slayer, I got to fall in line. It's a Muggle Slayer.
Gospel.
Guys, nihil nova subsola. There's nothing new under the sun. Kaner happened the exact same way.
Oh, that's true. Okay.
Are we live right now?
Yes. No, I'm kidding.
Oh.
No. Kaner. Yeah. So, well, we'll explain Kaner later. Actually.
Knee tricks. I have. Yeah.
But it's not.
So
it's not a knee trick. If you want to go
into like certain tricks that, like, again, like we talked a little bit about that history nugget. There's another one that I thought of. That also happened in Colorado about 2008. That I haven't seen a lot of since, but yeah, actually, so this was a really innovative time, really, because we started to use our terminology to predict new tricks.
Oh yeah.
And one of the ones that came out of it nowadays we understand is like its best form is like a shuriken. I think we see a lot of that.
Okay.
And the okay, so the origin of this, kind of funny, I'll go ahead and take credit for this, was over MSN Messenger, I want to say.
No way.
Kyle McLean and I were talking about this, right? That you could do your flip finished a little early and then do a vertical rotation. And so we started doing it by means of a cartwheel front And then right at the end, we would rotate into a hook kick, and we called it a scimitar because that's like a crescent knife thing.
And it's a sword. It's a sharp object.
Sword.
We tend to name tricks off sharp objects. So
off blades, right?
Yeah.
And this was like a crescent. I don't know, whatever. Anyways, so we started doing this, and then Kyle kind of took it like a little bit to the next level, and then Sesh did it a little bit. This happened first in Colorado, 2008. I feel like I have footage of it back on my computer. Didn't see it for like almost a decade.
Yeah, I believe that.
And then people are coming through with like shuriken cutters and now rotating and kicking at the end. And this is like, this is the power of the predictive language.
Oh yeah.
This is why it's important to do the work, even if it's flawed.
Yeah.
Right? We start predicting new tricks that we wouldn't have thought of before.
Well, so it's funny to hear your point of view on this, because I would say we and mainstream tricking just doesn't acknowledge if things happen in different axes. And what I mean by that is, let's say your hips went over your head at any point in the trick, it's an invert trick. Doesn't matter where the twist happened, doesn't matter where.
Okay.
With certain exceptions, obviously, like
Sure.
full up, Arabian, like you
Right.
acknowledge that those are variations that you have to do
Totally.
in a certain order. But for the most part, we're just like, oh, like, and most triggers would be like shuriken. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you do the 3 kicks while you're inverted or the last one's uninverted or whatever the hell it might be.
I would say no.
Yeah.
I would say you do a shuriken cutter, finish that flip, do a vertical rotation on the vertical axis with a kick. That's a shuriken. In my opinion.
In my rebuttal to you, Nick, is, do you realize the sheer amount of permutations you just added to tricking just by doing that? The absolute...
We just need a system that can account for it.
Yeah.
But that's what it should be, in my opinion, is like, give me a system that works, but like it needs to account for that.
So we
and
have...
similarly,
go on.
So
you go.
So we would consider, and maybe this is like worth talking about. I don't know, but we would consider the cork axis as being like going around the side, but a little bit more like a backflip. And this is about as far as we had gotten. And the B-twist axis, and there was an open debate: is the B-twist and the cork axis the same axis with a different takeoff? Should they be called the same trick? Yeah. Right? A B-twist is a front side takeoff with a flat spin. Cork is a backside takeoff with a flat spin. But cork and gainer switch are not the same thing. Cork is here, gainer switch is here. If you pass the 45 invert like axis at any point in the trick, it's an invert. If you're under it at any point, you're on the B-twist / cork axis. This is an open question when I was in tricking. I don't know. I haven't really like gotten to a solution to that.
Yeah.
But we would consider like a pop full that goes around the side as a pop cork, because it takes off backside, goes around the side, never inverts.
Yeah.
Your hips never hit an inverted position.
Yeah. See, that's more. So okay, let me
not TKT, but yeah.
Yeah. So my pushback to something like that is early tricking. We actually had a podcast episode on this. It was micro dividers versus I don't know, like unifiers. I might be screwing up terminology there, but essentially you could come up with a tricking language that either chops things up to like the finest parts, and you could take that to its logical extension, and that means that there's infinite landing positions. There's like it's like too hefty to talk about, right? And then
I can say this really succinctly. We could choose as our language for tricking clips of the individual tricks. That's the way to describe the trick. But now the words that we're using in our language are as complicated as the tricks themselves. So we haven't done anything by producing a language to describe tricking.
This is the map thing.
Yes. When we produce our words for tricking, we want them to be encoded with as little information as necessary in order to distinguish all the various words from each other, and hence all the various tricks from each other.
But, and here arises a dilemma, obviously, is now as we get to the other end of the spectrum, now there's less things we could describe. Now there's more things bunched into the same name, right? Now like a cork done here versus a cork done here, those are both cork, which like is fine to the human eye. And so it's like finding that
even
balance,
further, a fully inverted cork would also meet that criteria too. So not just like 45 degree or even horizontal, like the whole range from horizontal to completely inverted would be, acceptable as a cork, and it would be recognized as a cork.
Exactly, and this is non-trivial because it comes down to how you define these tricks, because that's how you distinguish them from one another, because that's how you assign them to be words. And since these definitions have to be the sorts of things that you could hard and fast see and delineate easily without with the smallest amount of gray area, error margin as possible. We're kind of forced into this dilemma of some small minor alterations / modifications of tricks are not worth considering just purely from a structural perspective.
Okay.
And I guess my point of bringing this up is in old school tricking, there's a lot of this micro dividing, as I call it, which is like, oh, I did this trick, but I put my arm here instead of here. Okay, it's a new trick.
Yeah, a grab makes it a whole different trick, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would say, us specifically, but even just like tricking as a whole has kind of gone towards the other side, in my opinion, in terms of like, you know what, it's okay if we bunch in all these things together. Like Sugarcane, doesn't matter if you did the kick while you're vert or while you're invert, it's this. Not saying that's right or wrong, because I think there are pros to your way of dealing with it, in the sense that it's descriptive and there's more possibilities to I don't know how to
to that I would say I think just hearing the discussion and kind of like thinking about old school terminology, seeing the direction that we're going, probably something in the middle, right? Yeah. Like it's something that has some components that are generalizable, some components that divide it, but if we lean too far into generalizing, then it kind of like
everything's a backflip.
Everything's a backflip. Or we go too far into micro dividing, then there's a name for everything, and like how do you make this approachable? From a teaching standpoint, it may be more exact, right? But is it really teachable? And so therefore functional.
Yeah, once again, the language that consists only of clips of the individual tricks is totally exact, but that doesn't help us if I actually want to say it out loud.
And this is like a part of tricking terminology that should be considered, is its teachability. This is something that like I talked to Charlie a lot about, I listened to him and Mark talk about this at Loop Kicks for a little bit, that like the way we communicate tricks impacts its approachability. And one of the things that we found very, very successful in Colorado is that TKT made the initial components of tricking very approachable. You could find success. You could get like 5-6 tricks your first session and feel like walk away like, holy cow, I learned something. And when we were doing original like mainstream terminology, you'd spend weeks trying to land a 540, sometimes even getting hurt, needing to come back to tricking and still trying to land that 540. And like you didn't find a lot of success. And so we saw a lot of success in the younger kids learning like all these little kicks here and there, and it was super micro divided, but there was a lot of success there. It's got to be a balance as far as like how we approach, like again, and I think about this from a physics standpoint. You throw all of the language of physics at like someone just learning things, and it's like, get me out of here, you know? Yeah. But if you can break it down to something that's approachable, then you find more success and you get people that stay longer. And what's the balance here, right? Like, I almost wonder if there's like this, this beginner kind of language that we use, and it's a level of lies. It's like levels of lies. And then eventually you graduate out of it into, hey, now we're going to throw the full gambit at you because you can get it, right? You can get all of the different terms. You've seen your success. You're bought into tricking. I don't know, I don't know. I'm waiting for someone to like find that good balance.
It's funny that you say that.
Yeah, Bryce and I over here are really excited to talk about this topic. We haven't yet produced content on it, but this is exactly what we are like seeking to do with the concept of like the zeroth order tricking models.
Well, not just that. We have an entire program and basically a research program in mind for tricking language. We want to come up with a hierarchy, an ordered hierarchy of languages where they increase in complexity over time in the sense that they add more and more divisions, more distinctions to tricks, and hence they describe more and more tricks. And so you can start at the bottom where things are simpler. And there might even be, at the moment we have one agreed position for a bottom, but it is somewhat arbitrarily decided upon, and so theoretically there could be others.
It all has to be arbitrary, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. All of it comes down to something arbitrary. But the idea though of coming up with sets of languages which are ordered by complexity so that people can start with something simple enough to describe what they're doing and then move up as they want to attempt more sophisticated tricks and describe more sophisticated combos. That's something we want to make explicit and concrete and a resource available to lots of people. And BTT, or at least the way we keep referring to it, we keep calling BTT as if it is one singular terminology, but it really is this program. It is our different levels of language and what we think should be included. We have yet to decide on precisely what the various orders of levels are. Like, we've gotten as far as the 0th order, and we haven't gotten to the 1st, 2nd, or anything else. But we know at the very least that what we're going to do from our 0th order model is add in bits of complexity so that we can make it up to higher orders, so that we hopefully can eventually get to the level of tricking that is currently seen today.
I mean, I think we've seen elements of this in the past, and to your point, like when we learn hyper, right? Originally, that's landing on the kicking leg. The jump that Dan made was a hip position. Actually, you're moving. So like if I'm going to do, again, to go back to the 360 hook, I start in backside to do a 360 in the air and a hook kick. A 360 hyper would mean that you hook kick and then you keep going with your hips one more 180, and so you're going to land in front side. You could land on left leg, right leg, or both legs. It's your choice. If you land on left leg, you're landing on the kicking leg.
Whoa.
You land on both feet, that's still a hyper. We call it like a pop 3 is the landing style. And then if you land on your right leg, you still hypered it, but you didn't land on the kicking leg. And this is what opened up the door for front swings, and where we realized that carry through and front swing were not the same thing.
Oh yeah, I remember that. So
yeah.
we've
seen it. We've seen elements of this before. Sorry,
yeah.
Frank, go on.
No, I was just gonna say I'm genuinely shocked that that's your formulation of hyper.
At the time it was.
Okay, so would you say that has been revised since? Like, what's your latest formulation of hyper?
I'm kind of open. I understand that like what we're doing, what I see physically when I watch tricks, is a little bit more complex than that. But for a vert kicking standpoint,
it's actually simpler.
It seems to track.
It's actually simpler than what you described.
Much simpler. Hyper is a very particular landing position or set of landing positions.
Yeah, in the way that we introduced it. But I was going to say, Frank, I think current mainstream sees hyper similarly to how Nick does, in that there's like 3 different types of hyper.
Yep.
And I do think that there's a little bit of like mainstream confusion on like it being a landing stance as well. Because there is some people who talk about it being a landing stance, but it's this really blurred, ambiguous thing what hyper really is. And so like for us, it's very clear because we've been talking about this theory for a very long time, and people really haven't been sold on it yet. But
I don't know. Yeah, I thought it was pretty mainstream to say that hyper is our formulation.
It is. Well,
yeah, no, I gotta say, most of them people who I know of who talk mainstream,
most of them people,
they all seem to agree that hyper is a particular stance. They don't necessarily call, like, if you do something that is an outside or hook kick and you land on it, they wouldn't call that hyper. That they would refer to.
Well, these days, yes, they've gotten better about things like when a kick's not occurring, like mega. But I'm talking like the types of kicks that Nick is talking about, ways to land like actual kicks rather than specifically,
vert kicks are messy.
Vert kicks are messy.
Exactly. It's not. It's a little bit removed from the invert style of or the inverted context for hyper is I think what.
To Jason's point, at the time, there was a lot of ambiguity, right? We were trying to talk about some concept using the word hyper. But we also used it in vert kicking, meaning something different. So it was almost like the mapping thing. We had one term that was mapping to 2 different or 3 different things. And like that, again, open question. We didn't have a good answer for that when I was in tricking. And I was like, look, if you're talking about vert kicking, this is what I mean. If you're talking about flipping, that's a different stance. And we just didn't have a good word for it that everyone agreed on. So it sounds like we've moved past that a little bit.
Well,
exactly. Because we specifically want to avoid that thing that you're mentioning there, where you're like, well, for flipping tricks, I have this naming convention, and for vertical kicks, I have this naming convention. Ideally,
and this is so astute.
Yeah, we would.
This is so astute. Because like Shuriken, think about it. Like we're now mixing the axes, right? We're mixing like the flipping and the kicking axes. We can't have it mapped to two different places. This is a very astute statement.
Ideally, we should be able to describe all of these different things within one language, if for no other reason than because when I start speaking combos, which is what we ultimately describe in tricking, right? We don't talk about individual tricks, we talk about combos. Well, good God, if my sentence consisted of different words in different languages, like I would have to come up with like a meta grammar for how I combine different words in different languages. Let's just not do that. How about we do not do that and make things a little simpler on our brains?
It's almost like tricking is like English, because English is like doesn't make any sense, right? And this is what we've landed on.
Well, okay, so Nick, I actually have this is the revelation we came up with when we came up with BTT.
Get me out of this hole.
So let me ask you really quick. Would you say any given kick, if I told you, whatever, backside 7, whatever, just name any kick.
Sure.
Would you say that you are able to do that plus a flip?
So am I plussing the flip on the front, or am I plussing the flip on the back?
Well, that's where you get into your shenanigans. But either way, doesn't matter.
Fair.
Would you say there's a counterpart for that where there's a flip added somewhere?
I'm not totally sure I understand the question. Help me understand.
Yeah.
Maybe I confused myself.
A version of this trick where your hips are above your head at some point.
But everything else stays the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just explain to him the concept?
Yeah.
Rather than ask
about it? Help me here.
Yeah, so essentially Talking Tricks recognizes that essentially, like, instead of individual tricks and kicks like existing and as separate entities, instead every kick and as a result any twist that you do, right, and twist will refer to an inverted rotating trick, has a vertical counterpart, and every vertical counterpart has an invert counterpart.
Ooh.
And we actually see this. We actually see this a lot with like the emergence of like front swing vertical kicks, right? Because that's like a front side stance that doesn't, like, we don't really see. And in theory, we should also be able to do sequential takeoffs into these front side stance tricks as well.
Yeah.
And among all of the transitions should be able to get here. We should be able to carry through into them. We should be able to front swing into them. And we should be able to tack swing or wrap swing or grandmaster swing into them. We should be able to lotus swing, Muggle Slayer swing into them.
Why name all of the vert kicks after the various why name all of the various vert kicks after various inverts? Well, simply for the purpose of having a smaller, simpler, more minimal language. They're all taking off exactly the same, and that's really the characterizing feature. That's why these tricks are linked. The fact that there's a flip, an inversion occurring at some point during the trick, is just essentially a modifier. It's something that you've done after, something that you've done after the takeoff, where the takeoff, we all generally agree, is the defining feature of a family of tricks.
And I think even Dan Perez would agree with that, as from what you told me earlier.
Honestly, feel like that's what he was getting at.
Yeah, I feel like
I'm not going to speak for him, but
it does seem like we have. Right, it does seem like a lot of what Dan was pushing was a lot of the conclusions that we're reaching now, and maybe we're taking a few steps further. Maybe we're revisiting some of his steps with more clarity, a little bit. I can definitely see, like, we're definitely closer to picking up Dan Perez's torch than I realized, which is hard.
Yeah, and we had not bridged the gap between vertical rotations and the flipping piece of it. And something to consider here is that if we're just talking about the rotation of your hips exchanging positions, and that can happen on different axes, what we were trying to figure out is how do you account for the rotation that's included in the axis rotation? Because that adds a rotation, right? It adds excess rotation into the thing. And so we would think about twisting, meaning that there was a hip rotation and also a flipping rotation. And then we would think about spinning as a hip rotation with zero flip. So like we said that there was a flip, but its value was 0. And we didn't know what to do with that, right?
Interesting.
But if you look at there's some inconsistencies, right? If you do like a 1.5 vertical rotations, and then you do a flip with a 1.5 like rotations, you start looking at the in-between piece, and there's like some kind of missing rotation or added rotation. There's just like some inconsistencies here, and we didn't know what to do with that. And so there's some degree of like open question about how do you account for this. And so what I'm looking for is like something that's consistent that makes that all work. Because I remember us saying like you do a cork, and it's almost like you're doing more than 360 in some ways, right? But it's like the 360 hip rotation and then also this like 45 flipping. It's more than 360. It's less than 540. Because the original cork was like spin step, kick your leg up, do 1.5 rotations, and land facing the ground. And that's like weird.
I think that's somewhat physically impossible, but I don't know. Like,
I mean, I definitely got hurt trying it, so
I was gonna say,
don't do it.
We've talked about that specific thing.
We've talked about
bad
the reasons
quirks.
why it's physically impossible before.
So we would account for this as flat spin.
Well, conservation of angular momentum prevents you from doing it the way that people originally envisioned cork.
Yeah.
And that's why it evolved into the version that it currently is today, essentially.
The Anise style cork, where there's actually a flip involved. Yeah.
Yes.
Bryce, I guess in this issue kind of hints at our distinction to just kind of jumble up everything into either you flipped or you didn't. Because of this like continuous deformation of like this flat spin to flip ratio that occurs, and it just like
holy cow.
At any point
I can give a minor mathematical justification.
I had not considered like approaching this from a ratio standpoint.
No.
Well,
here's the
wow, that's a can of worms.
Well,
please open it.
Well, my primitive standpoint on it, I know Bryce wants to go. I will let you go, Bryce, because I'm pretty sure we don't really adhere exactly to my primitive viewpoint of it. Was that a flat spin or like a flip accounted for about a total of like a half amount of like flat spin rotation. And so like, aerial and B kick are fundamentally the same thing, except it's just a continuous deformation from flat spin to invert.
Yeah.
And what's the amount that is changed? Like zero flat spin to 0.5 flat spin.
Right.
And, like functionally the same thing for like front flip or like Arabian. Arabian's not really a good example. Like rise and stuff. But
and thinking of these families of tricks in terms of continuous deformations and tricks which are closer to each other or separated by walls in the continuous deformations is kind of what I found is the best way to come up with those hard and fast, like, all right, that's where we've come up with like inversion is hips above head or not. Because when you look amongst families of continuous deformations for various tricks, like tricks where the inversion happens later or sooner, the trick, or something like A twist or B twist, you find that those things are within sort of a wiggle room where it would be kind of hard to tell necessarily on a camera in all circumstances which was which. You'd have a whole lot more arguments than non-arguments, as opposed to something that's a hard and fast cutoff line. You know which continuous deformations satisfy the requirement that hips never go above head and which don't. That's a very hard and fast line, a closed set, we would say in topology. And so it's not two intersecting open sets like was the previous situation.
Can I add some non-math stuff?
Go for it.
Because I think I have a way simpler situation. You guys are overthinking it. So, and this is solved by how trickers actually already naturally talk about twisting. Because we don't talk about twisting in degrees. Trickers have never given a shit about it, honestly. Like, TKTers, you guys are nerds. But really, the way the way that trickers think about rotation is when do you get to your next complete landing? That's what matters, right? And plus or
often,
and spotting. So like when we talk about cart full, we talk about that being one twist, despite it not being 360. What the heck? What's going on there? Oh, you just got to. You just got to complete again. Like it's really
and it's literally the same thing with Rise as well. Like Rise isn't considered a single twist, but it seeks to get back to the nearest complete.
Because you got to the nearest complete, but you didn't reach the international trick line. Is what I would call it, right?
You didn't pass the international trick line.
Yeah.
You didn't pass the international trick line. Well, yeah, that's okay. And this is actually really interesting too. I guess this concept is one of Frank's contributions. is the international trick line that occurs at like
right here.
True 0 degrees rotation. Like if you are an absolute front side, like you are facing your target in direction of motion.
This is a twist. This counts as one twist. This is rise. This does not count as one twist. This is where the international trick line is.
I always thought of a twist as being a half rotation.
It is
like a Webster half.
Yeah.
We considered it a Webster half.
I agree.
And it literally is that, yes.
Yeah.
But it's always been a twist, and then if you were to
twist.
do double a twist,
It's the backside 7 of flipping.
and so what I'm trying to get at here is I don't give a shit. I don't care how much rotation you have. That's why I don't really care. That's why I don't really agree with Bryce and Jason as much. And it's okay. You guys can shame me later. That's okay. But this fixes the problem with vert kicks and inverts and uniting them, because in my opinion, I don't really care what we call it. If we call it a 9, that's a one twist round to me. I don't care the actual degrees that happens. It's you got to the
actionably
nearest,
speaking, yes.
you got to
except for when it's front side and then it's 2 twists, right?
No, it's still you got to the nearest complete once again and you round kick.
It sounds like we're just choosing our starting position and then measuring from there.
Yeah. But
or am I like
that's what
even
Bryce and I
too
are
granular?
Doing. That's what Bryce and I are doing.
You're right. It's literally just choosing whatever.
It's like, yeah, you're right.
whatever arbitrary translations you feel like adding to all the beginnings of the rotations.
Yeah.
We just Jason and I and Nick just feel like adding 0.
Don't throw me in here. I don't know what I believe yet.
No,
I don't know what I believe.
You're in favor.
You historically have been a plus 0er, so.
You don't want to add any of the excess rotations to.
I don't. That's very true. I don't want to add excess rotation. I want to only count for the rotation that was done from the start to the end of the trick.
You're in this
Nothing
boat.
Extra. Am I?
Yeah,
Did we just gang up on Frank?
All I'm saying.
I'm not trying to gang up on you.
All I'm saying is 900.
Really easy.
900 is just an arbitrary stand-in for one twist. That's it.
But
so
not
this,
when it's a front side trick, though. It's literally 2 twists.
So
I don't understand how you can like reconcile that like physical difference. If it's a front side 9, it is 2 whole twists, and if it's a backside 9,
let me hear what Nick has
you
to
just
say.
made a good argument for TKT. It's a
No,
front side
know,
9. It's 2 whole twists.
No, I recognize that, Nick,
Okay,
and that's exactly what I am arguing right now.
Cool.
I'm like, it doesn't make sense that a 9 on front side has like a whole additional amount of rotation.
So
Aside
can I
from the
somehow
already
include everybody? Like
arbitrary translation.
I want to agree with everyone in some way because I want us to be friends. So, so I agree with like if we were going to describe what physically is happening, I'm probably on the Bryce Jason train, right? But if I'm just trying to communicate an idea, absent of the like exactness, I'm in agreement with Frank. The word 9 doesn't necessarily mean a rotation. It's describing a thing, and we all kind of know what that thing is. It's like I did a rotation, I looked at my target, and I did a round kick. That's what mainstream does, right? It allows us to communicate it. But is it accurate?
Well,
I don't know.
It's not just that it's accurate. It's that now that we introduce more than 2 different positions from which to do this, right? There's not just backside and front.
This throws your math brain into a loop, doesn't it?
There's all of the different
Mine
takeoff
too.
positions, from all the different 90-degree distinctions, from all the different sequential foot positions. And you have to ask yourself the question: what arbitrary rotation do I add to each one of these?
So.
And you either do all of that work or you just say 0 and make.
So I feel like Frank is trying to communicate what's happening just to like anybody that passes by. I feel like Bryce is like, no, I'm measuring it. Damn it, make it like super exact. And Jason's like, can we do both? Like,
actually, no, you would be totally incorrect. I have a more extreme opinion on this than even Bryce does. Where
you're a zealot, amazing.
Yeah, well, so Frank likes to generalize and recognize like what he says, like he kind of marries our terminology with mainstream. Bryce has the points that we have been pushing. I take it even a step further and I recognize like 90-degree of rotations. So like if you were to do something like a like historically like a cheat 9, or what we would call in mainstream BTT a tack 540, because it actually takes off from a perpendicular stance plus 90 from like true backside. It would actually be tack 450.
We didn't know what to do with this idea. I'm glad that you're picking it up.
And then,
we had no idea what to do with this.
I'm validated. I'm
the
validated.
the horrifying
currently,
thing.
Currently, though,
Horrifying.
Bryce and I currently have aggregated it to just the nearest 90 degrees plus, I believe. So like that instance would be 540 still. But
Here's the
for
thing.
me,
Here's the thing. Jason thinks that he's the hardest liner here, but I'm about to go one step further. I think it literally doesn't even matter that we name the particular amount of rotations. It just matters that we name the sequence of different, positions that you could get to from the base one.
I could agree
So
with that.
we just call them 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on from the various positions. Don't even name the rotation. What's the first kick you can deliver from that takeoff position? That's 1 now.
Oh man, it's like we've turned this into radians or something. We're like, we're just gonna make it like a number, and then we're gonna
let's find a ratio.
The minimal
It's
amount of information necessary to transmit the idea. The minimal amount.
No, and I will explain to you
something from each of you right now.
Well, I'll explain why I like Bryce's point, because so one of my main reasons for calling 9 one Swiss round is because there's no way that people are just going to start I'm thinking about this practically, that people are just going to switch up the way they think about kicks and say like, we have the same name for these two different things. And this model names it it uses the same words we do, but it refers to something different. That is a big hurdle to pass through. I'm not a fan of that. To
validate you, we have been fighting this since the start of TKT.
Exactly, and that, in my opinion, that's why TKT has never become mainstream, is because it suffers from this dilemma of we already have names we already use those words.
We had these stupid names from Sport Karate, and I'm like willing to go on record and say that these dumb names from Sport Karate, and we've never been able to get past it.
And Nick,
even with a better method.
To agree with that point, like to kind of like help fuel that further, agreed. And this isn't sports karate. This is martial arts tricking. This is something else completely new, completely novel, something birthed of it, and we can pay respects how we need to.
Yeah.
But tradition be damned if it obstructs progress, in my opinion.
Yo.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, okay. Yes. Like, I do not care what our tradition was. Let's make progress.
Right, and that's and I know like before, we at the beginning of the podcast, you were kind of like, oh man, you're gonna like tear down Club 540 and stuff. Like we're tearing down all the old school things, but literally yes, because we can do better. Right, we can do better.
Back to what I was saying before about the horrifying revelation, and the horrifying thing I was talking about is that I actually have to agree with Jason with the 90-degree increments. And the reason I have to agree with him is because we subscribe to what we call the 4-trick model, which it's to give you a down and dirty, there's the 2-trick model and 4-trick model. It refers to unified tricks, right? You could either backflip and front flip, and those are 2 tricks, and that's the only 2-trick model, and everything you do in between is one of those. Or there's the 4-trick model where the 90-degree increments actually count. And we've since decided that we're 4-trick modelers, which means now I have to agree that Vertrix have the exact same thing going on, and we have to be able to distinguish taking off from 90-degree increments. So that's a horrifying revelation for me. But we should... Yeah, go on.
Can I ask a general question?
Yeah.
Are there other attempts at like finding... like this kind, like are there other attempts at this where we're trying to find like either a generalizable terminology or some sort of unified version of this, or are we like on this podcast, like as if I'm just like throwing myself in here, are you guys really the ones pushing it? Help me understand like how much unified theory of
the last person to put out a resource on all of this stuff would have been Brian Skinner with the Trig Theory website.
My guy.
No, not the last person. Sorry.
No, it's not. I wouldn't say it's the last one.
What's the last one you're willing to give credit to?
Well, no, I would say last is probably the wrong way to describe it. That's like the bridge gap between your generation and what's currently going on.
Well, let me just like stop for a second and say, Brian Skinner is a fantastic mind. Right? Like this dude, I remember at one point when we were doing, even before Tricking Tribe, dude would sit down with a cup of coffee, on the precursor, elevation tricking, and just like talk trick theory. And this is what led to trick theory.
Okay.
And
That's so sick.
yeah, amazing.
That's excellent. Yeah, no, because
Well,
he definitely bridged the gap between the old and what's currently going on now. There are also pockets of different individuals who are doing trick theory. Like, for instance, we know that Malik and Carson Crawford, the crawdad himself, they talk a lot. So
And to Bryce's point, a lot of these are very insular. Like, there's people individually talking about it on a platform, doesn't exist as much. This is the only other instance I could find. These
Who is
people.
this?
This is Seattle.
Okay.
I forgot.
Oh,
yes.
Is this Jared Ching and them?
Jared? Yes. Jared wrote this.
wait a minute. Holy, did they steal? Well, how could they have stolen it? We only talk about this behind closed doors. They used the grand unified theory.
No, Bryce. We absolutely appropriated the name of that from them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But here's honestly, Nick. Here's the issue. In my opinion, I don't think any other trick theorist has attempted to be as all-encompassing for trick movement, and not just like and beyond what is traditionally accepted as mainstream trick, like tricking. Like, we're talking things like the Muggle Slayer. We're talking about gaps in tricking, recognizing. We're talking about like vertical kicks with no twist. Like these things.
Oh, the zero hook.
I love it. Yeah. Or like 360 no hook, or 360 no round, or like 720 no round. No, you know what I'm saying? These things that exist, that like can be physically done within a tricking combo and continue a tricking combo with it, but just are currently like neglected by mainstream terminology. Yeah. And we so not only are we trying to encompass like inverts and vertical kicks, we're also including things that conceptually are just weird and not currently accepted or not currently done, or things that are done in like singular clips, and we're like, well, how do we account for that? Right. How do we account for this weird thing? Well, here we have an answer, and it's by currently like examining and giving hard definitions for things, and then finding cases that go against those cases. For one of our greatest, or not greatest, I shouldn't gas myself up too much. One of our biggest things we've been pushing lately in the past 3 months
Gas yourself.
has been swing theory, it's been applying a rigorous definition to what a swing is in tricking. And as a result, we've come up with categories for swings. Natural swings. Swings that are natural to the human body, or natural to the direction that we're going in the combo. But then
this is like against it.
But they are swings that are not counter to the flipping or the twisting direction for the.
And so this is where we get into things like croc versus cork. And
it's even crazier than that.
Beyond
Croc is a natural swing.
Yeah, croc is considered a natural swing. So and it's not
That's
even
how we understood it. Is like your hip position is the same for croc and cork.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
That's
Absolutely.
how we
No. Here's the thing. There are obviously unnatural swings, which means you either are now counter to your flipping direction, or you're counter to your twisting direction, or you've broken parity. This is the third way that people haven't really thought about.
Say more about parity.
Parity is yes, absolutely. I was hoping you would ask. So parity.
I love this word.
Parity usually just means whether you're even or odd. But the reason I chose that word is because it's selecting between one of two options. And the two options we have are perpendicular or parallel. Okay. If the swing was naturally meant to be a parallel swing, then you've broken parity by doing a perpendicular swing from that takeoff position.
Think about landing a full in a hyperstance that doesn't like rotate so that your hips are sideways, but your hips are square with the complete landing stance.
Sure.
And then you were to GMS, and as a result, your dom shifts 90 degrees, but you'd still do a GM swing. This swing would break parity in the combo.
Yeah. Okay, I'm tracking. So that makes sense.
But this is something that's like physically doable in tricking, right? But how do we really describe it? Well, it's a
question.
Stay tuned for talking tricks.
We have a potential answer. We've described exactly what swing is being done there. Okay. We have a name for that swing.
Give me the answer. I'm ready. You gassed me up. I'm ready.
Well, that is it is. That is the answer. It's a type of swing.
We have names for the various ways that you can break naturalness from what would otherwise be the natural swing position. If you're doing a natural swing, we just say swing X. But then there are exotic swings, anti-swings, and so on and so forth that tell you whether or not you have broken parity, changed flipping orientation.
You have literally co-opted particle physics.
Yes. Yes, I have.
Exotic.
I have done that.
Look, wait.
Parity, anti, like, we are talking about, like you're going into algebra right now, like abstract algebra.
Well, here's the thing.
Like, I really appreciate it. I don't know if it works, but I really appreciate it.
Well, the issue is...
I don't know enough.
Yeah.
The issue is how well does it work in practice? Maybe. Your mileage may vary. But in theory, this is a result of examining, like, you know, like looking at the whole system, trying to identify gaps, trying to identify symmetries in the systems that we're building, and then identifying, like, okay, as a result, this is technically possible.
Yeah.
And
you make a great point. In theory, we're looking at symmetries. Like, let me tell you, when I'm doing engineering, I am trying to break it down to, like, just some sort of communicatable thing. But when I'm talking to physicists, it is a very different language, and it's often way more predictive. But my God, is it not useful? Like,
yeah. What do you guys use 3S pi?
Hey, wait. It's not useful in the form that exists
of engineering.
In the highfalutin, super theoretical, most abstract form. But here's what you do. You take that form and you make some simplifying assumptions. What do you get?
You beat me to it. Is that
a spherical cow? Just kidding.
All cows are spheres. Get out of here. So, all reasonable math uses spheres. So, anyways, I'm thinking about it because, like, when I was working on my engineering projects, we had to really, like, okay, so I was working with, I'm working with engineers that have spent maybe 2 semesters in physics, and I've just done, like, God, how many? Like 8 or 9. And so somehow I had to communicate this, like, overly complex thing into where I'm like, I just need it to work, right? We need to go into lab and it just needs to freaking work. And that's what the gym feels like, right?
Yeah.
We just need it to work in the tricks. And so what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing that, like, maybe these things are not at opposition, right? We have a language that can communicate an idea in an understandable way to kind of anybody. Sorry for the engineers out there. That's, like, what I'm talking about. And then we have this, like, hyper detailed, and we're considering exactly what Jason was saying. We're considering symmetry. We're considering what Bryce was saying, parity. We're considering all of these things that, like, we know they have to exist, right? This is physical movement, right? They have to exist. All of the spectrum has to exist.
Yeah.
But, like, how do we communicate it, right? How do we get it to show up on the floor? And maybe these things are not at opposition, but they're probably different. Right? These are probably different systems of communication. Yeah. And I don't think either are wrong. It's just the level of accuracy is very different.
Yeah. And
right? Simplifying assumptions, as you said.
Yeah. And something I've noticed with, like, for example, coming up with trick theories, it's kind of a good idea to come up with a theory with a lot of false negatives, if that makes any sense. Like theories that it's like, you know, this probably won't work, but it's worth trying out in practice. And if it doesn't, then whatever. But you will eventually run into some true positives where it's just like Muggle Slayer for us was a true positive. Honestly, when we were theorizing it, we're like, this might not be anything. Like, we might see it done in practice and it's like, oh, fuck, it's actually just like a lotus just done shittily or something like that. So
this makes me think of, like, how we approach astronomy. Astronomy is the scrappiest thing in the world, right? Like, from a math, and I'm going to just, like, speak for you, Bryce. From a mathematician standpoint, physics is just scrappy and, like, doesn't make any sense, and it's just like you know, this, like, rugged dude in a bar just like, it's whatever, right? Like, and it just works, right? It's bubbles in a beer glass is how we figured out particles. And then that's how physicists think about engineering, and that's how, like, engineers probably think about, like, other things. But anyways, we can all agree that astronomy is this way, right? Like, we just kind of, like, figure out some kind of assumption that works, and somehow it's giving us good data, and that's kind of what I'm hearing from this as well, is, like, we need a scrappy way to describe things, and it's probably wrong in the details, right? Like, the more you zoom in, the more wrong it is, but the more you zoom out, the more, like, it works, and the more it communicates what's going on. It applies to the general case, but don't look too deep into it, right? Because it's probably not going to work. So I like this direction. This is so cool. We couldn't have dreamed of this when we were back in like 2008 trying to figure out like what's the difference between a cheat and a vanish, right? Like we've come so far. Kudos to you guys, really.
Thank you.
Kudos to you, because this is not a conversation that was happening.
Yeah.
You know, and we didn't have any actionable outcome from it, and you've already predicted things that should be there, and somebody went out and did it. Good job, Malik. And you know, like,
yeah,
we're
can't
on
do
to
that
something.
Shit. Yeah.
This may not be perfect, but my God, we're on to something. We really are. Fun police, get us on track.
Well, Jason wanted to say something, but I will say really quick that I do want to gas us up and say that like we have spent hours,
years,
it feels
years, like just talking about like not recording podcast episodes, just theorize like what works best here. I'm very proud of it. I unironically will say I think you boys have done a really good job. So
yeah,
thank you guys.
To be honest,
job,
like to give like some listeners at home a little bit of context, we meet almost always twice a week, and we always put in at least 2 hours each session. So there's 4 hours every single week, and we've been doing the podcast show for almost 3 years now. So yeah, essentially that times 4 would be a pretty good estimate on the amount of time spent just thinking about trick theory and talking it and discussing it amongst ourselves. So
and this is what happens is we get into these eddies and we get into these corners and all these like really like we get out into the weeds, and it may not be obvious because like we're not all privy to all these conversations. We didn't do the small steps to get to. You were just looking at the conclusion that you came to, and so it may be a jump for some viewers and listeners. Be like, hey, how did you even get here, right? But there was thinking to it, right? Like there was logic. There's a reason why we got here, and I just wanted to say like. I'm taking a step back all of a sudden, and I'm just like, holy cow, look at the ground we covered. Really, this is very impressive work. I'm a big fan of this. Maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong. I don't know. But the effort is clearly there, as you're saying, Jason. Like, you put in the time, and that needs to be recognized. So good job, guys.
Thank you. We appreciate hearing
I
those
appreciate
points. Yeah.
honestly, yeah, it is very validating hearing them from a tricking legend like yourself. We totally didn't pay you to say those things either.
No,
Slips a 50 under.
Organically.
But like, and to kind of highlight one of the other points that you mentioned earlier, like the fact that we don't have language to describe these abstract principles isn't doing these abstract principles in practice any favor, because one, not only are they like conceptually difficult to understand, but they're physically like even harder to perform. And if we can't even describe them in language, how can we expect people to just like conceptually think of them on their own, right? And then perform them. And then on top of that, we also don't have people doing it, and we also have a language that doesn't encourage this exploration outside of like what is mainstream. And as a result, like, you're not encouraged to explore in this way, in these really weird ways that we're talking about, these conceptual ways. So that's why it may not be for another like 10 years before we see like someone anti-swing an A to a triple. But in theory,
and it's quite strange, because there was this period of time where there was like this gold rush of people who were trying to land new tricks, but because all of the various mainstream takeoff positions had essentially had most of their skill trees filled out, they would just make the minor variation of doing some sort of grab at some point during the rotation. And, you know, the minorest of inflections, the minorest of changes in how you performed the grab was supposed to change the trick. And eventually
entirely on like a fundamental level.
And it eventually just became ridiculous, and people realized, like, all right, nobody cares about this. And people stopped doing these tricks as a result, because people realized nobody cares about this.
I don't see a lot of
and they're doing this all the while there is like an entire frontier of unused tricks out there that they could be staking their name on by landing all of the new, you know, twisting denominations in, and they just haven't been doing it.
See Malik at Muggle Slayer. And to further hit this point on, like, I want to talk about like, because I talk about this to the boys all the time, but I also want to talk to you about it, Nick, because you have a little bit of history and context with tricking, and maybe you can agree or disagree. But I think that tricking language and tricking mainstream language has been like, it isn't very encouraging of like new things, and like the words used are also like harmful to the idea of progress or doing these things further, exploring these concepts further. One example, in my opinion, is the over-cheated cheat kick, right? And this is probably the case of, or what I imagine is probably a kick that is supposed to take off from backside, like a sequential kick that's supposed to take off from backside, but ends up taking off from front side on accident because of the overstep.
Because there's a lot of rotation on the ground, essentially.
Right. A lot of on-ground rotation before takeoff. So, but if we were taking off the right leg, this goes from being like a tack or a wrap kick type trick, and for I'm saying wrap for Nick's understanding, to a rise type kick or a front swing tornado type kick, right? And what's crazy is like, from this over cheated cheat setup to get there, it's not okay. Totally okay if you front swing into it though. Right. And we'll just like totally ignore that these are basically the same thing, and that, we've been telling you don't do it from the cheat setup, even though that is a functional way to get into this sequentially.
There's a negative connotation to it.
If I'm understanding, there's like almost a bias against it.
Yeah. Correct.
Well,
yeah.
And it comes from the word over cheat. Cheat has a negative connotation.
Overcheat.
So to over cheat is to do more of a bad thing.
Because we understand the word cheat to be different in the English language. I see.
Exactly.
Right. There's a lot of like English language implication in tricking too that we have to work with, and I think part of it was landing stance back in the day. I don't know. This is one thing that really. Yeah, this is one thing that really annoyed me, was the original understanding of semi was to be like semi double twist was to refer to an over rotated cork, and nowadays
hyper cork in particular.
Okay,
as
yes,
I remember it. Maybe this is evolved, but like
no, that's technically correct. Yeah. But instead it like now like semi cork refers to that concept instead of like but semi in the English language is like has that negative association with it, that less than, that almost, right? So the way it's used in tricking doesn't really make sense. As a result, we proposed renaming semi to ultra so that it is additive.
I've heard this. Is this where this comes from?
Well, no.
This doesn't come from us, but yes, this is something that we push and agree.
Okay.
So yeah, it's replacing semi with ultra so that the language like literally makes sense, and then you can use it as a prefix or suffix however you please.
I like that.
So
I like that. Instead of looking at like double and then down, you're looking at hyper and up.
And and whenever we choose words to describe things in tricking, we should choose. We're going to choose English words usually, or at best, like maybe even some words in other languages as well. We should choose words that have positive connotations, just because they're not going to. Otherwise, when you say them, there's just going to be a psychological effect that occurs that makes you not want to do that trick. And what a stupid thing to do to
think about the muggles. Think about the muggles. But no.
So things like exactly. Things like our language impacts the tricks that we do and the tricks that are available to us. And like things like over cheating are not conducive to exploring new boundaries in tricking.
So I do believe that any sort of like unified tricking communication or language, as we've been calling it, does need to account for this. When I was like a zealot for TKT in my younger years, which I'm much softer about it now, I used to think of the word over cheat as like a negative connotation. And now I'm in a position I'm like, hey, this happens, and there are great tricks that come from it. We need to account for it. And as you're saying, Jason, we sometimes do flipping rotations, land in some stance, and then do the same darn trick. We do the same thing. Thank you. And so what I'm finding is that, it needs to account for that, right? It needs to account for that.
Yeah.
And not in a negative way, because like I think of a lot of the Korean trickers. This is how they do their vert kicking. For America, like this is a very Sam Lincoln kind of thing. We see it happening, and like this is a totally valid way to do tricks. But we're not accounting for it. We're almost discounting it.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Yes,
I don't like that.
That's exactly the case. We are absolutely
I don't
discounting the value that this brings to tricking and the versatility it does as well. Because now, because usually people will vanish from like a hyper stance, but now we can be vanishing from semi as well, or ultra. Yes. Like we can do so much more by just not discounting things. I'm sorry, Rick, go ahead.
No, you're good. Oh, sorry.
I agree.
So yeah, I mean, I want to start wrapping this up soon, but first I do want to like sell Nick on BTT. And the last point I will bring up about BTT that I hope will sell you on it is that there's a whole just spectrum of vert kicks that have not been explored because of the way we name our tricks, right? Because we say, like I said at the beginning, we say swing 9, we say vanish 9, we say whatever the heck. So now we've just totally erased so many vert kicks we can do. And what I mean by that is, for example, think of it about A twist, right? So A twist is a inverted trick, right? But you could technically do a vert kick version of that. So imagine taking off like an A twist, but you do a vert kick, and this has precedent. No, and it has precedent. It exists.
I used to do this trick. I know exactly the one you're talking about.
What would you call it?
On the end.
What would you call it?
I call that?
Mm-hmm.
Let me think about it for a second.
Yeah, that's right. You don't have a word for it. No, I'm kidding.
No, really, because like
but that's right. But that is the issue, though.
Yeah,
what we're talking
I would do it.
Yeah,
and I often got questions like, "What is that called?" And I'm like,
yeah,
I don't know. I just do it. But so like actually, I think it happens in Don't Vote for Mean People.
I love that sampler. Oh my god, that's like one of my favorite samplers.
There's a kicking combo in the beginning that ends in a snafu, and this trick is in it.
Yeah, it's been, and so now knowing that, picture any invert. Picture any invert you can do. That's a vert kick that exists suddenly, right?
Yeah.
So recycle exists. I think recycle always referred to like the GM version.
A GM swung vertical kick.
Yeah.
I think we called it. Let me think here. I think it landed in the vanish bucket.
See, that's
that's
psychotic.
That's so perfect.
Because it was a sequential takeoff, so it would be. I'd be standing on my right leg.
Potentially.
I'd put my left leg down, bring my right leg up like a step over hook, take off, 360 with a round kick. So we would count it as a vanish, I think.
But do you see the like mismatch between, okay, now we're calling this swing, we're calling this whatever. Oh, now we have a new word for this, recycle. That's not consistent with the way we
I don't
name.
know what recycle is.
Or
that was
an example. Yeah, whatever.
Well, actually, Nick highlights the point that we're trying to make in that the vanish transition consumed the identity of this trick.
Right.
This trick was only imaginable as vanish 3, vanish, whatever. But in actuality,
when we think about combos, they're made up of tricks and transitions are separate from tricks. So
transitions occur outside of tricks.
I agree.
The individual
it's
tricks,
a component of the trick.
exactly. The individual tricks and what distinguishes them needs to be completely disambiguated from the transitions occurring.
Okay.
Really quick, we even disagree with Nick the point that you may have accidentally, not intentionally made, but like transitions have nothing to do with tricks. Completely divorced. Completely divorced.
Hot take.
Transitions.
It is a hot take.
Say more.
It
Say
is.
More.
Transitions only account for the foot pattern that occurs between two given tricks.
I don't
and
that.
there are certain limits in there. So like in the way that like a takeoff, the takeoff of a trick begins the count of the rotation for the trick, so too does the landing of the trick and the counting of the trick, and then the foot pattern that would occur to take off into the next trick and begin the rotation. That pattern that occurs in between those 2 points is the transition.
I agree.
And so transitions still maintain the same identity that they always have. Anything that you would probably identify, we may have some discrepancies on misleg and rapid transitions. We can talk about those another time.
Interesting.
But essentially, though, like we would agree that most things still track the same. It's just a distinction we make between that. A transition is strictly the pattern between two tricks. Completely.
I agree.
Completely removed from a trick.
Questions.
Nick, I'm glad you agree because now you have you have to agree with our hottest take to date.
All right? Put me on the spot.
Rap fold does not exist.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I didn't think you'd put me there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, wait.
Well,
you have to
not in the context that you may think it does.
Yes, you have to be way more clear on what you mean by that.
But I want to sound spicy though.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly. He's trying to say it the spiciest possible way. He's saying the word rap full doesn't really make sense because rap full isn't even a part of our language. Rap is meant to describe a transition, right? But like really what rap is a type of swing. So
I don't disagree.
I
absolutely agree. This was a hot take back in the day. It's still a hot take now?
This has been
yes.
Maybe.
It's still a hot take. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
something that we accept as factual, though.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
I've agreed for a decade that a rapful is a type of swing.
Okay.
It's been absorbed into our assumptions here and that underpin our language. But since we know there's actually a mirror rap swing, the Muggle Slayer swing, it's actually ambiguous, right?
Rap swing is
sense.
now a category of natural swings.
Okay.
It's not. It doesn't. It's not a category.
I'm not up on the new terms.
It's a category.
Your fundamental assumption, I think we agreed with. I think
Yes.
I was taking the hot take years before this. So like, you know,
But
maybe
what
I've even died on this hill once or
Well,
twice.
let me put this simply. Do you think tactful and rapful are two different tricks?
So hold on. Here's how we understood tactful.
Okay.
Let me go there.
Yes.
We understood tactful as a combination of the two. Is you would do a sequential foot takeoff into a rapful,
Great.
or a rap transition to a flip.
Great.
And this is how I understood it as. Maybe not everybody understood it, but this is how I understood it. I had a lot of conversations with Dan. It seems like this is how he understood it too.
Most people
that's
would agree with
perfect.
that. Yeah.
That's perfect because that's exactly identifying that it's the same base trick being done after a different transition, swing versus.
It's one of the first times we ever saw two transitions happen into a trick.
But you could do
this is a
any
very novel thing.
But you could do any transition to any trick. So why?
I think well, and I think that
That's a whole
this
thing.
is that I think that this is actually Nick has like identified the problem is that this is such like this was a novel occurrence back then, and this is why it's still a
Very
problem
novel.
today, is because of this issue. And this is Nick. This is one of the issues that our language seeks to correct. Is the
like this.
divorcing of transitions used into the takeoff of tricks. So
that way tricking is a modular language. You can just take any two different tricks, and if they're the correct sorts of tricks, you know, that land in the correct positions and take off in the correct positions, and you describe the correct transition between them, then there's no problem there. That it is complete in the sense that it describes all of those various types of scenarios, and the individual tricks themselves are now distinguished based on takeoff, not, once again, like we were saying before, based on transition.
And so now for the horrifying revelation, this trick that you're looking at right now, the audience can't see this, but it's a rapful, or what mainstream calls rapful. We would not call
rapful.
Yeah, we would not call this rapful. We would call this swing tack. All right?
Twist.
Because
swing tack twist specifically,
Swing
because this is a twisted tack.
A front flip.
Because
something like that, yes.
Yeah. Because what we refer to as tactful is actually vanish tack twist, because it's the same fundamental trick that's being done here. And
I get along with that.
Yeah. And we chose tack kind of arbitrarily, to be honest with you, but it was a good fill-in.
Place to start.
It highlights the issue that we're trying to solve, and it provides us a place to present our solution, essentially.
Yeah, no, totally.
And it's exactly that. And like you said, yes, technically this is tack twist. So what would actually be tack, or the base trick of tack, regardless of what transition is used, or takeoff, the takeoff will always be the same. It'll be that from that plus 90 degrees stance off the right leg for left side twisters. But the base trick of it would have no twist in it. It would actually be either like something like you said, like an aerial or a front flip, or I know Bryce is crazy,
okay.
Or
we get into the weeds here. We're not doing this.
No. The base trick is a matter of convention, and we're not even going to get into the weeds of convention.
We have two conventions. We're not going to get into it because
we can just say that there is a convention, and that's where we choose to measure from.
Yeah, we're still
very happy.
And so
we're still ironing it out.
Yeah, and so I just want to wrap this up by saying, like, I just want to hear your overall thoughts on BTT. Like, do you think it's base trick terminology, by the way? I don't know if we even said that. I think we've been using BTT this whole time.
I knew that coming in. Yeah.
Okay, fair. So, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Do you have any critiques? Like, what's your overall thoughts of it?
So first off, I like the direction, and I like the reason we're even doing this. Right? So just from the beginning of an inquiry, this is a good direction. I like that, we're getting into a situation where, like, let's create a language that even maybe has issues, and we'll solve those issues as we go along, right? I'm kind of thinking about it almost like calculus. It's really, really good for some of these like basic attempts and basic things that we're trying to understand. And as we're getting into like more and more complex things, the description gets like crazy complex, right? And so we're almost now needing for the next step. And for like the math, like for Bryce, like some of the math nerds out here, right? Well, it's more of a physics thing. We needed something else that was more flexible. And that's where we got this thing called a Lagrangian. And it's like infinitely more flexible, but it's still it can be broken down into calculus. And that's kind of what I see here is like we are looking at maybe the first version of calculus for tricking. And there's going to be another evolution of it. It just has to be, right? We're getting infinitely complex in the way that we're describing things, but we almost need this like other thing, this object that can be broken into BTT. If this is our base understanding of it. And so just like on a basic level, I like the approach. I like where we're going. I like the direction. I even like that it's producing these like infinitely complex descriptions, because we're talking about like dividers and unifiers, like all this language that's like I'm just trying to understand this thing. And so ultimately I think we take this to the nth degree. I think it's a good inquiry, right? Let's do it. You know, let's like describe ourselves into a problem and then answer that problem with the next step. You're talking about 0, 1, 2, 3 orders of things.
Brother, and we've already done that. We've already dug ourselves holes to like try to get out of.
And this is how we do it, right? And like for us in like sciences, this took decades to get out of those holes. But you know, we get things like satellites, we get amazing things from this, right? And it is a worthwhile endeavor. And so, you know, don't get discouraged in any way. Right? It is discouraging at times when you're just like, my God, what are we doing? Right? or you're hearing flack from the outside, like, don't listen to that.
Have you ever tried to describe tricks with hands? Because dear God, tricks like using your hands in tricking.
I'm of the opinion that including actual hand variations to their full complexity in tricking requires fundamentally redefining what a trick in a transition is.
So we used to do cheat 720 hand chops in an apocryphal way.
What do you mean by that?
We would do a cheat like
a hand chop, like they're
720, and we would chop.
You're fucking lying.
I'm not.
No.
I'm not.
Okay, and so
it was done in like a mocking kind of way.
Yeah.
And then I literally saw it in someone's form, and I was like, holy cow.
And
we don't even mean that. We literally just mean letting your hand touch the ground and having it.
Well, trying to more specifically, accounting for things like touch up, touch down, and tricks. Yes. Accounting for things like your back or your using your butt on the ground, using like taking off from your knees. Like there's like a whole variety of like really weird shit that
I used to do a cork off my knee to my knee.
I know, and I hate it.
It came from the Viking sweep, right? That's fine if you hate it.
We hate you, Nick, because we have to describe it now. That's the problem.
because it's made.
Yes.
That's.
I have to now come up with a definition of trick and transition that is flexible enough to allow for that to happen somehow. And
I'm happy to be the wrench in your system. Listen, like really, we were like, hey, the Viking sweep is a really, really good problem to try and deal with, right? Like this is no joke, my favorite trick, right? I love the Viking sweep.
Nice.
And for the listeners that maybe don't know, this is an inside sweep where you then jump and change your hip rotation. You can go to a B twist, you can go to a raise, you can decide which foot you land on. Most people just like do a hook kick and keep going. I disagree with that. You should probably do a raise. Okay, that's my opinion. Do a raise.
Right.
So if you want to see like one of the best Viking sweeps, either look at the old school version, which is Velu, or the new school version, which is Bani Yaga. Bani Yaga's is beautiful, straight up. So, but this is a thing that we need to like. Wait, does somebody literally have it? You're looking it up.
I'm just looking it up on YouTube to see if maybe like I can...
I don't think so. This is a slang term.
No, this is still too deep in the lore.
Okay, just kidding. All right, you can keep going.
The first Viking sweep that we saw, like, I saw it in a training video from Velu, and then I did it in the Neo video, and that's what I feel like it caught on. I answered a lot of questions about like the Neo 1 video.
Viking is an appropriate name.
Definitely a Velu trick.
I was gonna say, if Velu came up with it, Viking is an appropriate name for it then.
Yeah,
because he's
like,
a Nordic man.
Like 2010 Viking, like Velu 2010.
Oh my god, with the bun.
Holy cow!
Yeah.
Imagine that running on the beach. Right?
King of Tricking era Velu. You talking about King of Tricking era Velu?
King of Tricking era.
Imagine that guy running on the beach. Scary.
Oh my god, I'd bolt out of there.
I'd run away.
Awful.
Right?
Yeah.
Or into his
Show
arms.
up at the village again.
Hey, fun police.
Get us back on track.
Yeah, let's get back on track. So, okay, basically, you're saying that BTT's on the right track. There's still a lot of issues to probably fix. I agree that.
And to be fair, that I do think that we will continually. I think Nick is right. We are going to find a point where we are building problems for ourselves, and I think we've already encountered some of that stuff. But I think that's just the natural progression of trying to understand this phenomena that we're working with.
It's unreal how many times I've changed my mind in talking tricks. I also think it's something to consider that this is a crash course, and Nick doesn't have the full understanding or full grasp of BTT. So like,
agreed.
He may think that we haven't solved problems that we totally have, and that that's kind of. It's something that we all won't know until we are all talking together and discussing them. You know what I'm saying? So,
well, whether or not like you've got some problems that you've created and haven't solved versus all I'm saying is that you take this terminology to the nth degree, to its like final stages, and you start answering problems like Bryce said. It needs to be flexible enough to handle this. If you get to a point where you're like, holy cow, we're breaking our terminology, we've done a good thing, right? We've really filled in a bunch of gaps, we've answered a bunch of questions, and now it's time to like, again, rethink our initial assumptions with something that's a little bit more flexible. It's going to take us to the next step. What I'm saying is keep going. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Is I like this. I do have a few critiques, but I like it.
Yeah.
I think that fundamentally speaking, like what you're doing is a good thing, and I can get behind it.
Great.
Ultimately, this is like the Charmeleon version of what we were trying to do with it, like a Charmander, right? Like we were just trying to figure this out, and we had no idea what we were doing, and tricking hadn't evolved long enough, far enough, and this is definitely the next step. But I do believe there's a Charizard out there. I haven't seen it.
I think the hardest part is going to be adoption, honestly, because like it is hard to come up with it's hard to come up with the actual theory stuff, but it's infinitely more challenging to convince people that actually the way they thought about tricking for years is maybe not the most accurate. Yeah. So
and this takes us back to like the functional part of it. We can have a language that's deeply descriptive, predictive even, but is it functional when it comes to teaching? And at the end of the day, when it applies to the industry, when we're talking about industry creation, whatever we use has to some degree be functional.
So brainwash the children is what you're saying. Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Understood.
Start them young.
Yeah, that's actually
the 2-decade approach. Start them young.
That's in our mission statement actually for Talking Tricks.
Brainwash the youngins.
Yes, exactly. So
well, and I've maintained also from the beginning that like realistically, I don't think Talking Tricks this time is necessarily now. I don't think as with any great project, it's never going to be recognized at the time of its when it's contemporary. It'll always be like in the past reflected on as being ahead of the curve. And I think that as long as we're kind of getting the conversation started about these things, we're thinking about trick theory on what I not to like be conceited, but I think on a very conceptual level, on a very deep level. And I think just even bringing these topics out and talking about them to other people is enough to get momentum going in the right direction.
This is what Dan was doing. He was talking. He was, for better or worse, right? Like he was thinking about it on a very, very different level back in the day. And and I would attest a lot of my vert kicking skill to that, right? I was doing kicks that my contemporaries weren't. And not because like I was better than them, but because I had the predictive power of his naming system.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's I mean, I'm telling you, at the time, it was like, what a rogue. Like the way we were doing is so rogue, and we think about like what Kyle McLean did. We think and how innovative we now understand him to be. Right? And we and yeah, maybe that's how we look back on this. And what we really need is someone to adopt this as their method of learning.
Yeah. We need a really good tricker.
And be a case. Well, and that's what was so...
BTT.
Right, and that was what was so powerful about Malik landing Muggle Slayer for us, was that it was like, a trigger.
Germanium.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do want to close this off. Do you guys have any final thoughts before I do that, though? Important.
I just want to say thank you so much for your time, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you guys taking me through this and like going into the weeds at times and explaining some history to me. Admittedly, I don't spend all my time doing this, and so I could be hopelessly underprepared if you were not, if you're not willing to like help me understand where you're at. And so thank you guys so much, and thank you for what you're doing. Right? I understand the hours you're putting into this. The viewers, the listeners may not, but I do. Right? I've been there, and keep doing the good work. Do not let anything deter you. Keep going, keep going, keep going.
Listen.
You have a fan in me. Please keep going.
Oh, we appreciate the kind words. And,
But Nick, are you a Bryce head, a Jason head, or a Frank head? Is the real question.
You have to decide.
You have to have a favorite, right?
No, you don't have to.
I was gonna say, can I just like...
He just like... Oh my god. But no,
I have an answer actually. So, part of me is in agreement with each of you, and part of me is in disagreement with each of you. So I haven't landed in a place where I agree solely with one of you. This is why I think I'm like, keep going, right? Eventually you'll pigeonhole me into a position, and that's when we know it's time to do something.
I was gonna say that's a cop-out answer, but it's okay. We'll accept it for
Absolutely.
now.
He's like, it's the only way I get off this call tonight.
No, but it really was a pleasure having you on. Thank you for all the kind words.
Great being on.
Yeah, you're a legend, and I say this not because you're like a close friend of mine or like literally any other reason, but you really were one of my favorite trickers growing up. I watched Don't Vote for Me people way too many times, so thank you for that.
I'm happy to have been part of your history. Thank you. I'm glad that I could have contributed that way.
Of course. But yeah, thank you to the audience for tuning in. We do have a Patreon if you'd like to subscribe. We have some goodies there, some behind the scenes stuff. So subscribe there if you like what we're doing. It helps us pay our editor and do more cool stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much. Bye.
Thank you guys.